Welcome to this explainer. Picture this, if you will, a high-stakes leadership challenge, but the boardroom is actually a mythic chamber. And the weapons they're using? They aren't just market shares or legal contracts. No, they are using language, logic, and the very nature of existence to fight this battle. Today, we're stepping into the role of impartial historians to analyze a really fascinating conflict cycle from demonological literature. It's an absolutely profound breakdown of historical absolute monarchical authority going head-to-head with a highly layered strategic rebellion. We're going to explore a fictional, yet incredibly tactical event known as the Gathering of the Contested Crown. Prepare to see how sophisticated philosophical assaults, weaponized courtesy, and just raw, unfiltered defiance attempt to completely dismantle absolute power.
Okay, here's our executive brief for today. We're going to start with the contested crown, move right into the king's philosophical assault, look at the duke's demands, and then the prince's refusal. Finally, we'll examine Bael's silent counterattack and how the survivors actually managed to adapt. Let's get into it. Starting things off with Section 1, the contested crown.
Okay, let's dive into this. To truly understand why this unsanctioned rebellion is such a big deal, we have to define the incumbent corporate and royal policy that's actively under attack. In any traditional hierarchy, a council called by the ultimate leader confirms their authority before a single word is even spoken, right? But this gathering, it was summoned by a coalition of rival kings and high-ranked demons behind the boss's back. The policy they're fighting is called the Doctrine of the First Name. See, Bael hasn't just claimed authority. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a total monopoly on interpretation. He asserts that because his name comes first in sequence, all other demons have to understand their own greatness as something that begins entirely beneath him. He essentially wants to own the very meaning of their names simply by virtue of being first.
So the council kicks off with a simple but profoundly dangerous insult. Its mere existence without Bael's permission is an act of total defiance. Yet, Bael shows up anyway. But he doesn't arrive with a grand herald or some flashy physical procession. The text describes how his absence entered first, followed by a shadow, and then this overwhelming, suffocating pressure of attention. Imagine the extreme emotional tension in that chamber. It plays out like the script for a dramatic theatrical tragedy. Chairs are literally creaking without any visible weight touching them. The psychological warfare has already begun, and nobody has even raised a single debate point yet.
Moving right along to Section 2, the king's philosophical assault.
This brings us to a direct comparison of the most brilliant counter-arguments of the meeting. Let's break down how these three rival kings challenge Bael's absolute rule, evaluating who relies on superior logic versus raw defiance. First, Paimon represents knowledge. His argument relies on precise, undeniable logic. Sequence is not essence. Just because you're the first page in a book doesn't mean you're the crown of the entire story. Then we have Belial, representing consent. He shifts away from pure logic to the actual mechanics of power, arguing that a crown only matters if others choose to stand near it. For him, favor and loyalty are what make a king real. Finally, Asmoday brings craft and design. His logic is just piercing. The first form of anything is just raw material. True power lies in its final design and use. Each of these demons is systematically picking apart absolute monarchical tradition, but from completely different intellectual flanks.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer theatrics of Belial's approach. He rises with absolute elegance. He bows to Bael's invisible presence, but, and here is the genius part, he holds the bow just a fraction of a second too long. He completely weaponizes courtesy, making his reverence look like a cheap performance. He praises Bael's courage for confusing priority with superiority. It is a masterful, passive-aggressive corporate strike, literally poison wrapped in etiquette.
Belial then drops a question into the room like a coin on a corpse.
He asks, if no one desires your rule except those afraid to contradict you, are you truly sovereign or only difficult to escape? Let's be real. This is a top-tier debate tactic. Belial's goal isn't even necessarily to defeat Bael right then and there. It's actually to force the other high-ranked demons to want to hear Bael try to explain himself. He makes Baal's untouchable authority look like nothing more than a trap.
And then Asmoday follows up with this absolutely piercing quote. After Bael claims that he governs the first arrangement of things, Asmoday just laughs softly and says, "Then you govern clay before it becomes dangerous. Congratulations, First King. You rule the unmade." I mean, wow. Asmoday perfectly targets the hinge between concept and use. It's a brilliant logical method to dismantle Baal's claim. He proves that being the origin of something means absolutely nothing if you don't control what that something eventually becomes.
Shifting gears now to Section 3. The Dukes demand recognition.
Abruptly, the dynamic in the room shifts away from the kings and over to the great dukes. Let's visually contrast these two worldviews, because it's like a clash between upper management and the ground floor workers. On one side, we have Baal's historical tradition of absolute monarchical power. It's highly abstract, based entirely on firstness, pure origins, and a fixed sequence. On the other side, we have the Duke's argument of practical labor. Bael dismisses them as mere executors, just hands attached to another demon's head. But the Dukes argue that execution, opening tombs, moving the physical world, and breaking ships in storms, that is the actual mechanism of governance.
Byrne, stepping up to speak for the Dukes, delivers this chilling reminder of how the world actually operates. He points out that, sure, a hand writes the treaty, a hand lifts the treasure, but a hand also closes around the throat of a doctrine when that doctrine forgets who actually enforces it. The Dukes are reminding the boardroom that physical labor and execution are what truly sustain a crown. Abstract rules mean absolutely nothing without the physical force required to implement them.
Next up, Section 4. Refusal to witness.
So rather than arguing logic like the kings or asserting physical dominance like the dukes, the princes utilized the incredible power of passive resistance. Bael wanted them there to act as his confirmers, hoping their witness would automatically translate into obedience, but they methodically undermine him. Let's categorize them real quick. Vassago states that hidden truth simply won't bend just for a crown's convenience. Citri points out that raw desire cannot be commanded by a mere order. Ordering desire only makes it colder. Stolas looks up, noting the stars move by ancient measures that are completely unaffected by Baal's pride. And Seer proves that speed can outpace the beginning before it even finishes announcing itself. The princes know a fundamental rule of power. To witness Baal's manufactured superiority is to help manufacture it. So, they just simply refuse to participate. Which brings us to the climax in Section 5, Baal's silent counterattack. The emotional tension absolutely peaks here as Bael finally flexes his raw, unyielding advantage. He has been questioned for hours as though kingship were merely a classroom exercise, and he finally decides to act. And this brilliantly illustrates Baal's terrifying power. He doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't yell. Instead, he simply removes the first word from every argument spoken against him. Paimon's grand sentence loses its start, Beleth's accusation loses the word love, the arguments just stagger into total ruin. It is a stunning jurisdictional flex. But then, something incredible happens. The demons adapt. They begin speaking without the first words. They realize that while Bael can remove the beginning, they can still build meaning from whatever remains. Let's look really closely at Baal's declaration here. This is not metaphor. This is jurisdiction. Baal's strongest argument isn't better philosophy, and it certainly isn't spoken vocabulary.
His ultimate weapon is the strategic absence he can force upon others before they even open their mouths. He proves that he doesn't need their agreement to stand before them. He literally controls the airspace of reality.
Finally, we hit Section 6, Surviving the Loss.
Having faced Bael's reality-altering power head-on, the high-ranked demons shift their corporate strategy. The entire council realizes that proving Bael powerless is mathematically impossible. But they learn a vital lesson. Bael's absolute power to start a sequence does not make all other powers strictly derivative. A doctrine survives contradiction if the contradiction relies on the doctrine's terms. But by adapting, by pushing through and continuing their sentences despite the missing first words, they learn to exist and communicate without asking firstness for permission. They survive the loss.
Just as the council settles into this bizarre new reality, Andromalius, who by the way was invited not as a judge but just as a witness, delivers a devastating moral evaluation. He sharply reframes the entire conflict. He states that the crime isn't Bael's sequence. It is that Bael uses his position to excuse contempt for everyone else. This completely changes the nature of our legal brief. It reveals to us that this wasn't just a technical debate about origins, it was always about pride masquerading as legal doctrine.
Bringing our executive brief to a close, we return to the core maxim of this conflict. A throne can survive a rebellion, but it may not survive being systematically questioned by other thrones. Bael technically retained his firstness. He won the meeting. But by forcing the high ranks to argue in the first place, he unwittingly gave them a shared, highly dangerous language for resistance. He won the immediate battle of jurisdiction, for sure, but he opened a massive, permanent schism.
So what does this all mean for us? That leaves us with this final, provocative thought to take away from our explainer today. Looking at this intense structural breakdown of power, ask yourself, is absolute authority ultimately built on the pure sequence of origins, the undeniable logic of being first? Or is it merely sustained by the sheer jurisdictional power to silence the opposition before they can even speak their full truth? It is a fascinating question of power dynamics. Keep questioning everything, and we'll see you next time.